everybody, let's talk Portuguese. Today we're going to be talking about the Acordo Ortográfico de 1990. That's right, we're talking about the new Portuguese orthographic agreement. That international treaty that has changed the way that we write Portuguese forever. Certainly, depending on who you talk to, the new orthographic agreement is exactly that dramatic. If you're a native Portuguese speaker, you already know what I'm talking about, and if you're learning Portuguese, well, now you'll have a better idea of what that is. The Acordo Ortográfico de 1990, or the Portuguese-language Orthographic Agreement of 1990, is an international treaty that is designed, at least in theory, to harmonize and unify the spelling of Portuguese in all places where it is spoken. It is a large international treaty that was signed onto by all of the countries that at that time had Portuguese as an official language. This includes, yes, of course, Portugal and Brazil, but it also includes countries like Angola, Mozambique, Cabo Verde, São Tomé e Príncipe, Guinea-Bissau, and later on East Timor shortly after it became independent from Indonesia. Before this agreement, there were other orthographic agreements in place, and there were large inconsistencies in the manner of spelling Portuguese depending on which country you were in. Spelling reform in general is a very controversial topic. As I mentioned before, this spelling reform is a particularly controversial spelling reform for Portuguese speakers. Many other languages have undergone spelling reforms to no less controversy, including France, which quite recently implemented spelling reforms, German in the 1990s, and Spanish as an ongoing process. In all of those cases, there has been a huge public outcry and absolute indignance over the changing of the spelling. And that's not by accident. People get used to the way that they were taught to spell words. When we're taught to spell a word, it is emphasized that there is a correct and an incorrect way of spelling them. When some new agreement comes along to change the official spelling of a word, we rebel against it because we were taught for so long that the real and correct spelling was the other way. So predictably, that has very much been the case both in Portugal and Brazil with this new orthographic agreement. The orthographic agreement was the result of decades of tinkering with the spelling of the language, as well as the political will to deepen cultural ties and facilitate the flow of goods and services. But even despite that, the implementation of the orthographic agreement, signed on by all of the previously mentioned countries, has been spotty at best. It wasn't until 25, almost 26 years later that the orthographic agreement was fully implemented in the two primary countries that it would affect. Yes, that's right. The orthographic agreement was only fully permanently implemented in Portugal in mid-2015 and in Brazil on December 31st of 2015. In both countries, that was at the end of a 6-year grace period, which meant that the old and the new orthographies would continue to be considered valid. At the end of the grace period, the new orthography became the only formally accepted orthography. Some countries have even delayed the implementation of the orthography altogether. Angola has not yet so much as ratified the orthography out of concerns for the special needs and status of African Portuguese. Although Mozambique has ratified the orthographic agreement, it has yet to implement it. But with all of that being said, you might be wondering what actually changed. The new orthographic agreement treats written Portuguese as primarily phonetic. What that means is that the letters that are written should correspond to the sounds said in a given word. Evidently, this means eliminating silent letters, and in the case of European Portuguese, that meant eliminating the etymological silent letters. These letters, such as C and P in words like aspecto or ótimo, were etymological letters kept in the word to indicate that the vowel before it should be pronounced openly. Under the new orthography, all of those letters have been eliminated. In the case of Brazil, the issue of greatest impact has been accents. What in English is popularly and sometimes erroneously known as the umlaut, or otherwise trema, was removed from written Brazilian Portuguese. Those are the two dots that you see above vowels. In the case of written Brazilian Portuguese, they were used on U's after Q or G to indicate that you would pronounce the U. This applies to words like tranquilo or pinguim. Under the new orthographic agreement, the trema is no longer. But it is also the case for words that follow standard Portuguese syllabic stress that had accents. I'm talking about words like vou or assembleia. In Brazilian Portuguese, there used to be an accent over the O or the E. Those accents as well are no longer. The orthographic agreement also mostly harmonized the system of hyphenating words in Portuguese. Depending on the country, there were different and inconsistent ways of hyphenating compound words in Portuguese. Now, combinations that end and start with two different sounds are smashed together with no hyphen. Combinations that end and start with the same vowel are hyphenated, and certain prefixes are always hyphenated as well. But the new orthographic agreement isn't without its inconsistencies. There are certain divergent spellings that are not fully addressed by the orthographic agreement. This is the case with the G and J in words like berinjela, the H in the word úmido, the CH or X in words like shampoo or shampoo, the SS or C cedilla in words like miçanga, and even the way that S and C are handled is vague. However, in the latter case, the text of the new orthographic agreement makes specific mention of the use of S over C in certain instances, like in the words Singapura and Sintra. The reason for its inclusion in the text is because the spellings of those names with C, albeit common in Brazil, came to be considered an archaic way of spelling those words. Similarly, Angola has concerns with the way that the orthographic agreement handles new letters such as K, W, and Y. These are letters that are non-native to Portuguese but feature prominently in words that came to Portuguese from other languages. They are very extensive in African languages, and because the orthographic agreement does not formalize how to treat those words, Angola has had problems with the implementation of the agreement. Reading my subtitles, you may have noticed that I don't write with the orthographic agreement. There is, in fact, a very simple answer for this. I started to learn Portuguese at the end of 2011 and the beginning of 2012. 2011 to 2012 was when the orthographic agreement was first introduced into Portuguese schools and first became the standard for taught Portuguese. Because I was moving to Portugal, I sought out specifically European sources for learning Portuguese. However, at the time that I was first learning to speak Portuguese, the vast majority of resources available to me were still in the old orthography. By the time I got into formal classes for Portuguese, I was already writing fairly well in Portuguese. The teachers that I had were not very bothered about which orthographic standard to write in, although they were technically teaching the new orthography. That led to me simply continuing to write the way that I had been previously. As a result, I still basically don't use the new orthography, although my writing does have its own particular stylistic quirks. Will I adapt my writing to the new orthographic agreement in the future? Who knows? I very well might. The truth about the orthographic agreement is that for as much controversy as it has generated for its inconsistencies and the offense to the old way of writing things, is that the newest generations of Portuguese speakers are learning to write in the old orthography as the correct way of writing. What it means is that it is inevitable that the new orthography will simply become the orthography. It's just a matter of time. At some point, kids today will have their own children who will continue to learn to write with this orthographic agreement. Those kids will only know a world in which this new orthographic agreement is the standard of writing. And in fact, those kids might end up finding that the old way of writing looks fairly peculiar. This is one of the numerous ways in which linguistic evolution works. As time goes on, we change things about the languages that we speak and write. Older generations resist those changes, and newer generations simply accept them because they are usually the catalysts to that change. But for now, that's all I've got for this video about the Acordo Ortográfico de 1990. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, if you learned something or otherwise found it interesting, leave me a thumbs up down below. You might think about subscribing to my channel if you're not already. I make videos about food, culture, and yes, indeed, the Portuguese language. And you can find all of those videos on my channel or in the eye above, and I will see you next time.